Hello and welcome to another D&D Stories. I am your host, TheWriter, and this is a show where I sit here and regale you with all my tabletop gaming stories and remember when something cool happened. So today, we will take an interesting journey over to a different system from Pathfinder or D&D or World of Darkness over to something called HARP. Now, you've probably heard me mention HARP a few times, usually with disdain in my voice, because HARP is a D100 system instead of a D20 system like so many other things that you and I play. And HARP is so complicated, so convoluted, it has so many books. It tries to cover everything, and in so doing, it covers too much. So, like, your character sheet would be 10 pages long with all your abilities and weaknesses and strengths and history and items and what do you look like, how much do you weigh, etc., etc. And then HARP was separated into splat books by genre. Like, there was one book that was for World War II games, and there was another book for zombie apocalypse games, and there was another book that was for generic fantasy and things like that. And there was one for futuristic, like, mech warfare. And HARP stands for High Action Role Play, so it covers all the genres. You just had to find, like, the proper book for whatever you were trying to run. So, in so doing, its character sheets became so complicated. It's like, you know, a lot of games nowadays have, like, a session 0 where everybody decides what they want to be to suit the campaign. Session 0 for a HARP game would be like 6 hours long, and by the time you got done making your character sheet, you know, people would be like, can we just, like, play video games or get onto HARP or not HARP, but onto WoW or do something else, because, you know, all the math and numbers and bullshit just to set up a character in HARP takes forever. And it has classes. I mean, there's soldiers and snipers and survivalists, and, you know, all the core races from D&D are represented there. So there's cyborgs and pilots and shamans and all kinds of stuff like that. Like I said, all you have to do is have the proper splat book to cover the genre you want to go with. So today's story covers the one of the only times I ever played HARP, because it took so damn long to get set up, and when we finally went, it was a very strange game. So follow me on this journey where we put down the D20 and pick up the D100, which basically looks like a golf ball, if you actually have a D100. I don't think there are actually very many that are well made, because they're like a dice, but it's in plastic, and if you roll the plastic along the equator of the two halves of the shell that it's in, then you can almost always roll a high number. Like, it's very easy to dupe a D100 if you roll it correctly. It's not like a D20. So you would usually just roll D10s, like a percentile, and then double zeros would be 100. But this was back during my Gamers Guild era of going to college, and you know, I was relatively new to the community, relatively new to Gamers Guild, and one of my buddies, whom I had played video games and stuff with, whose name was Robert, he invited me over to his apartment, and he was like, yeah, we're getting ready to play a game of HARP, and I've had this campaign going for a while, you know, I've got a spot open if you want to come and just kind of check out the system. And so he comes over to my little tiny economy apartment that I was staying in, and he shows me, like, all these numbers and stats and things, and he completely overwhelms me, and he goes, well, you know, we've got X, Y, and Z in the party already, you know, do any of these classes sound good to you? And I go, well, what about Shaman? What is that? And he goes, I don't normally let people play as shamans because they're so powerful, but you are a new player, and, you know, as long as you promise not to be, like, hyper-aggressive as a character, you can be a shaman. And so I wrote up, like, a character concept. I was like, okay, how about, like, a guy who shepherds the dead, a medicine man who can do a little bit of healing and a little bit of like jewel crafting to make money, and a passive kind of character who would be like a wise man, not really like a combat oriented thing. And he goes, all right, that sounds good. And so we set about for several hours making up my character. And again, HARP is, your weight can factor into your acrobatics, and your knowledge can factor into how well you can pilot an airplane. And there's so many like synergies and cross magic and cybernetics and all kinds of things. HARP is a clusterfuck of genres if you let it be. Which is why most campaigns that run with HARP have one book, and you're like, okay, we're going to play a zombie game. Here's the zombie book. You're not allowed to use anything else, okay? Or, we're playing a fantasy. Here's the generic fantasy HARP book. Don't go over there and use, like, the Mech Warrior, the Mech Warrior HARP book. It's just going to be this. Unfortunately, this campaign covered almost everything, so all of the books were available to this brand new guy that was jumping into this campaign that wasn't just starting. It was right in the middle of it. So I got overwhelmed pretty quickly. So I just, like I said, I wrote up a concept and I said, okay, put this into stats, Robert. So we ended up making an anthropomorphic like bear character who was a shaman, and he had in his game's universe he had like ice elemental people and bear people and humans and elves and dwarves and he handpicked like 15 races from all of fiction, and I was like, ooh, bear people, I can be a bear person. That gives me extra health, and fur will keep me warm in cold places. But I could be like a more tribal society kind of character, and the lantern that I carried would help me shepherd the dead to the afterworld and stuff like that. Now, shamans, like Robert said, are very, very powerful because they have two very interesting abilities. One of which is that shamans can talk to anything. They have the universal language imprinted into their minds. Now, what does that mean? It means you can talk to people in any language. You can talk to animals. You can talk to, the elements like storm clouds and rivers and trees and things. You can also talk to inanimate objects like, the carpet on the floor or the cheese sandwich in the fridge. You can talk to it. It may not have anything interesting to say because it's a cheese sandwich, but shamans can literally talk to anything. So you could, if you came up to like a combination lock on like a digital pad, the shaman could lean over and try to convince the pad to tell him what the combination was to punch in the numbers and stuff like that. You see how broken that is pretty quickly. It's a universal translator that covers all things of all forms of matter, alive, dead, or inanimate. Their other ability is that they can move spirits. Now, what does that mean? Suppose you had like an impenetrable door in front of you. It's made of like solid steel or whatever, and you can't pry it open. There's no lock, there's no keypad, there's no nothing. It has to be open from elsewhere, but you can't get to elsewhere. So a shaman could take like a glass marble, like a bag of marbles out of his bag, and take the marble and take the spirit of glass out of the marble and put it into the door. And now that steel door has all the properties of glass, and he can just take a hammer and smash it. You see how unbelievably broken that is? Or just the opposite. Say you were transporting an incredibly brittle magic relic, and you pulled out like somebody's wedding ring. You could pull the spirit of diamond out of that wedding ring and put it into that old relic, and suddenly that relic has all the properties of diamond. You can kind of see how hesitant Rob was to let anybody play as a shaman, because they can basically make or break HARP wide open. They can learn all the secrets by talking to anything, and they can destroy or convince objects to do things based on moving spirits around and trading their properties. It's like the eternal alchemy opens up in front of you, and you can just fuck with everything. So that's why he wanted a more passive shaman, because an aggressive shaman would carry a bag of marbles and like, okay, your titanium armor is now glass. Stab. Oh, this locked door now is brittle as a wind chime. Smash. I'm going to talk to this locked door and convince it to unlock itself. Goes through the door. You would break the game wide open. But, I was brand new to HARP, and I promised to play a passive character, so he let me on the grounds that I was like an elderly, like, medicine man. And I named the character Mundle, after one of my World of Warcraft characters, who was a Tauren warrior, I think, yeah. But Mundle, here in HARP, was an anthropomorphic bear shaman, medicine man, jewel crafter. There was, like I said, the character sheets were like 10 pages long, so you had to have a class, a race, a profession, a history, all kinds of crap that goes into these that never gets mentioned during the game, so it's kind of frustrating. But Rob told me, or Robert rather, Rob from Ouroboros contract with somebody else. I knew two Robs. Robert, who was running HARP, said, yeah, we're going to, just come to my apartment. We're getting together. We're going to run this game and see where things go. What I didn't know was that Mundle and I were going to jump into a campaign that had been going on for about 8 years. And I didn't know this until I went in and sat down. So apparently we were on chapter 38 of like a 50-chapter book. And Rob had like this big fat folder in front of him that was full of like pages of history and, players that had done certain things. So here's the ramifications, and this is why the world's different. World maps, regional maps, backgrounds, histories, all kinds of stuff. Just this monster brick of a folder. And he sets it next to him. I was like, that's the story so far. I was like, I'm not fucking reading that. After all we did, the hours that we spent on just my character sheet, I think I'll just wing it, man. If there's anything about the setting, and quick DM tip to you guys that are running games, if there's anything about the setting that your players need to know, write like one page of paper and say, here, this is the major stuff that your characters know. This is the commonly accepted religion. These are the nearest 3 holy orders. There's rumors about this cult going around. The local vineyard serves wine to the king. Anything that might be relevant. Just like write it on one page and hand it off to them. It's like, this is common knowledge in your region. Here you go. Rob had this freaking brick. And I was like, are you writing a novel? Or what is... After this 8-year campaign, or no, he said 8. It was this 8-year-long campaign that I was stepping into the middle of, and I was like, are you writing a novel, or what are you... I think he was trying to write another, splat book for HARP. He never got it published, because of course he didn't. But, he had his own range of supervillains, a fleet of airships that could travel in outer space, an undead horde that wandered the deserts of so-and-so, and merfolk in the sea. And he had this massive, massive detailed world. I mean, the guys over at Tabletop Terrors would blush at the amount of detail and just, crap that went into this thing. And I was like, what am I getting into? So I just kind of pushed the brick, over to one side, okay, give me the one page that's about the region I come from. Okay, I've got that. Let's try and start the game. And it was this big, unwieldy group. We weren't playing with, grid maps or anything. It was more like theater of the mind, but we were all sitting in his living room rolling dice on the coffee table, because we had, the couch and the love seat and the recliner and a couple of kitchen chairs and a pizza box over here, and everybody had sodas and... make sure you crush your can, throw it in the garbage. We do recycling on Thursdays, all this stuff. And it was this big, unwieldy group of like 8 people. And I wrote down the ones that I could remember. So we had Mundle the Shaman. We had a rifleman who threw all of his talent points into like sniping, so he could get like a plus 200 to sniping because it's a D100 system. So adding plus 200 would be like a plus 40. We had like a regular soldier who specialized in grenades, which was a whole set of spreadsheets in HARP. If you want to see something complicated, Google high action roleplay like grenade chart and just look at that bullshit for a while. We had like a tech buff guy who had like gadgets, and like he had like a Batman belt with a gadget for every occasion. We had an ice elemental lady who was just this beautiful woman who was, you couldn't touch her because you would freeze and die. So she wore like basically an astronaut's outfit and kept herself sealed in so that she wouldn't touch anybody directly and kill them, And we also had a changeling, a guy who was a criminal in so many different cultures and places that nobody really knew what he looked like anymore because he would change depending on where he was and who he was with. So, which was very interesting because Mundle, somebody who could see spirits because he was a shaman, could see what he really looked like. So it made that guy nervous because he could see like the base form that he was playing with. But that's 6 people. I feel like there were 2 more, but I'm not remembering everybody. But it was this monster, unwieldy group for a theater of the mind kind of game of freaking HARP. So let's kind of drop you into the scenario, shall we? So we've got Ice Elemental Lady and Sniper Guy and Mundle the Shaman, Shepherd of the Dead. Just this weird group of people that got no business being in the same room from all different genres. And you got to remember, there's space travel and cyborgs and shamanistic magic. This is like Final Fantasy on crack because like 8 different source books all got poured into this exact same setting. So Final Fantasy is probably like the closest thing we could get to making a comparison. Magic and technology together. And basically we're like a ragtag group of swords for hire, I guess, or guns for hire, if you will. And our quest is just kind of a never-ending quest for money and resources to build up a base or to build up ourselves as a company, like, or a guild or whatever you want to call that. And we find out that a pyramid has been discovered in like the deserts of blah-de-blah off to one side. I've long since forgotten the name because this was like 8 years ago, but an upside-down pyramid. And we go, really, what's keeping it balanced? And he goes, it's buried under the sand, you idiots. And I go, oh yeah, okay. We don't know. There's futuristic technology here. It could be balanced on a needle somewhere. Shut up. So an upside down pyramid. And we go, oh, okay. So we could go in there and look for artifacts for archaeologists to sell to museums, to, it could be like an ancient magitech, conflagration of technology that's long since been lost and nobody's ever rediscovered it. So we're like, all right, we're going to check out this pyramid. We've got an airship, because of course we do. Like I said, I kind of stepped in the middle of this story. So they figured they're going to a place where the dead are kept, so they need to bring along a shepherd of the dead. So Mundle the Shaman steps in to go with them, beware the sacrilege and all that stuff, to keep them from being cursed or poisoned or crushed under a tomb's traps. And since Mundle can talk with anything, he can find out if there are any traps by talking to the walls, talking to the floor, all that stuff. The floor might not have anything interesting to say. You never know, because Mundle can talk to anything. So we take our airship and we go way out in the desert, and we pack up our supplies, and we're like, okay, we're going in. And of course it's been uncovered, and there's a small city of tents outside, and like, oh, we're not the first ones here, are we? But, everybody's gone. and we look and we see an opening that's been pried open with crowbars and moved aside with beasts of burden with rope. And we look down, there's a big staircase. It's like 30 feet wide, like processions probably went through here to go down into this pyramid. And so we go down and we find that the place is occupied by dwarves. And we go, dwarves, really? The pyramid is earthen in origin, and earthen are kind of the people that came before the dwarves, when dwarves were made of like clay and the gods were forging them into a sentient race and just kind of like winding them up and watching them go before they became like the flesh and blood dwarves that they are today. There's earthen in Warcraft, there's earthen in the Red Book, there's earthen in several places under different names, basically saying that dwarves used to be like golems, but they were like sentient and sapient, and they could have culture and build pyramids and stuff like that. But they were like living automatons, kind of, forged by the gods, and then once they were happy with what they made, they turned what remained of the earthen into the dwarves. So it's like a common ancestor way back thousands of years ago. And so there are a couple of hundred dwarves here, looking at all the hieroglyphs, lighting all the torches. They clearly haven't been here for very long. They've been digging the darn place up to see how big it is. They thought it was a platform at first, but, spectrographs say that it's a upside-down pyramid and all that stuff, and that word reached us. So here we are. You're not treasure hunters, are you? No, of course not. Well, the earthen were our ancestors, and we're here to recover our ancestors' artifacts to learn more about the past of the dwarves, and, don't fucking touch anything. And we're like, tell us about the earthen. That was a mistake, because Robert reaches over into his giant brick of lore and regional information, and he pulls out this packet of like 5 or 6 pages of earthen lore, and we sit in a big circle around this campfire inside this pyramid, because the initial floor is just like one big great room, so that's where everybody's staying to be out of the desert heat. So it's a giant room filled with columns, but there's also secret passages that they're trying to find. So we sit in the middle of all this, so nobody thinks we're stealing anything, and we receive like a lecture, basically, about the earth, and it's all the information I just told you. But he goes into like their histories, their lore, their war with the mermaids at the edge of the world at such and such BC time, and he goes on and on and on, and finally we're like, Rob, stop, God. We appreciate, I can appreciate a lore drop when I hear one, but when you go on for hours and hours, of just exposition, you gotta stop. Give us the cliff notes, and we'll keep the game moving. Like I said, if you're gonna do a big lore drop, give it to your players beforehand in like 1 page of format. But we receive like a lecture about the earthen from this archaeologist, while there's other dwarves moving around with magnifying glasses, hammer and chisel, taking pictures and spectrographs of everything. And they go, well, why don't we help you look for artifacts so we can bring them to you? I don't know. And our ice elemental lady kind of puts a hand on his shoulder, still in her spacesuit so she doesn't kill anybody. He goes, don't worry, we won't take anything without your permission. And she's got really high diplomacy, like somewhere in like the 180s, so pretty darn high. She was probably our face character when I think about it, but her role is high enough on the D100. He's like, all right, well, since you're here to learn like the rest of us, I guess it'll be okay. So we decide we're going to stay the night there, and while we do, our ice elemental lady has to remove her outfit, because if you sleep in your armor, just like in D&D, if you sleep in your armor, you get aches and pains and penalties the next day. So she has to go off, like way off to one side, and like unseal herself, and take the astronaut helmet off and take all the everything else off. She can't really wear clothes. like a normal person because they just freeze up and they shatter. So she's standing there, naked. If you can imagine like a Fee from Skyward Sword or whatever, like a Zora made of crest, like just blue filled with moving sparkles. This beautiful young woman whom you cannot touch because you will die. Like setting her stuff to one side. She's got like this little side room because there's a bunch of antechambers in every direction. She gets an empty side room to kind of, be naked and have her bedroll and sleep safely and not hurt anybody. And that's something she has to constantly think about as this character. But one of the dwarves tries to sneak in and cop a feel in the middle of the night. And it doesn't go well for him, as you might imagine, because, as soon as he's got like 2 fistfuls of her boobs, thinking he's going to molest this poor woman off to one side, his hands freeze over in the groping position. She wakes up, flicks him on the nose, he turns into a statue, and she just kind of like gently, rests him in a corner, and that's the end of that. I don't think she actually told anybody, like in character. I don't think she ever like told any of us or any of the dwarves. So later on, they're just gonna wander into this room and find this guy as like an ice block, in the booby grabbing position, dead, because he froze all the way through. You cannot touch this woman ever. So she puts up like a little hologram sign, extreme danger, extreme cold, do not come in, and hangs a little curtain and calls it a night because that's the best she can really do. But she kind of serves as an air conditioner once the sun comes up because the sun beats down on the pyramid, and unless they close the giant trap door, the heat comes down into the pyramid as well. So long as she's running around naked, there's cold air going everywhere, filling up the place and making it more comfortable to be in. But eventually, she kind of has to put her astronaut suit back on and like seal herself back into the potato chip bag that she has to wear, and put all her seals back on so she doesn't kill anyone. And I was like, it's kind of like playing Rogue from X-Men. And she goes, yeah, it's like you can just like take a glove off and touch somebody and they fucking die. And she goes, well, it takes a few seconds, but So we go looking for secret passages the next day. And we've got rested up. Our sniper's got his rifle all loaded. The soldier's got his grenades on his belt. Mundle the Shaman's lifting his lantern, looking about for the spirits of the dead, but there don't seem to be any, which is odd and kind of sets off an argument. Like, he can see the souls of all of his party members, and he can see the souls of the dwarves wandering around. They're like small points of light or small flames. To represent the fire of your soul. But there are no like dead spirits. There are no ghosts. There are no like places where the halls are roamed by the spirits of the damned or anything like that, because the Earthen, like I told you, were kind of like automata, just they were sentient and sapient. So we kind of sit for a while and we go, well, maybe they didn't have souls. I mean, they built a pyramid. They clearly have a concept of death. But if the gods just made them to serve as like a beta for what the dwarves were going to be, or a prototype or whatever, maybe they were just no different than golems. It's like, well, they could think and feel and they built halls for their dead. Surely they had souls. And we get into this long argument. Cats have souls. No, they don't. Well, they can dream and they can see themselves in the reflection. What does that have to do with anything? And we argue back and forth about the nature of death and the idea of creatures being created specifically without souls. But, they built places for their dead. Isn't that sad? And just different things like that. And the DM just kind of leans back and lets us argue about it for a while. And we go looking for a long time because, this pyramid is monstrous. And they found several side passages leading down so far. But we wanted to find one of our own. And when we do, it's an elevator. And not like a rope, like dumbwaiter kind of thing, but like a proper, like electronic elevator. And our gadget guy goes up to it and he's like, this thing is still online. And he pulls the panel open. He starts playing with old wires that have seen better days, but they still work. There's no, the place was sealed up. There's no moisture, no dust. Nobody was running around. And we go, I think this thing still works. And it's like, well, why don't we see where it goes? The pyramid's upside down. Let's go to the lowest floor. We go, all right. So we all pile into this ancient elevator, and we punch like B6 or whatever it was. And the elevator goes down, 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 like way further down than we were giving it credit for. Past the pyramid itself, because we can see the little diagram with the little light bulb that shows where the elevator is in conjunction to the pyramid. We go way past the tip of the pyramid and further underground. And when the doors open again, we are standing in like a futuristic metallic hallway. And we all go, what is this? And it's like, it's a genre shift. So we put Mundle the Shaman in the back and Ice Elemental Lady in the back, so that Sniper, Soldier, and Gadget Guy are up front. It's like, this is going to be their forte for a while. And the lights come on as we're going down this hallway, and it's metal. It's like walking down the hall in like the Death Star or whatever. It's just science-y and angled and perfect. And we look in different rooms. There's not really a lot here, and we finally find an insignia spray painted on the wall, and we find out that this is an abandoned space pirate base. And you gotta remember, all the splat books got mushed together, so there's space travel, and when there's space travel, there's space pirates. They were using this pyramid basically as a shield to cover over top of the base that they built under it. So any spectrograph would see the pyramid, but not the base. If somebody was like trying to look for them from orbit, they wouldn't see them. It would just like a big rock or a big, tomb. Beneath it, they put their base so they wouldn't be detected. But clearly this place has been empty for quite some time, but the lights still work, which means there's a power source somewhere. We go, wow, ancient power source, from ancient space pirates. Cool, we should find that and maybe bring it back. And so Mundle gets down on his knees, and he's got his big bare paws, and he puts his paws down on the tiles, and he goes, is there anybody home? Does anybody roam these halls? And the floor is an entity, and Mundle's the shaman, so he can talk to the floor. The floor tells Mundle that there are 3 people here, still alive. And Mundle looks over and is like, the floor tells me there are 3 people still here. And everybody kind of stares at Mundle like he's special. And they're still getting used to his powers. Like, he's looked around and told them that there are no souls of the dead here, and now he's talking to the floor, and the floor apparently talks back to him. They don't know what kind of spectrum of supernatural powers that Mundle has, but the floor tells them there are 3 people there, so they go looking. And they go, these people would be what? 2,400 years old, maybe. And our gadget guy starts doing analysis of like the walls and the ceiling to see how old this place is. He goes, yeah, this place is topping out at about 2,500 years old. It looks great. The only reason it looks great is because there's really not a lot of movement or activity. It's like dust is mostly dead skin cells. If there's nobody here with skin, there wouldn't be dust. So everything looks perfect because nobody's been here for millennia except for these 3 people. And eventually we come across them, and it did not go well. The 6 or 8 of us come across these 3 guys that are they're cyborgs, but they're also they're thousands of years old, like lizard guys with cyborg implants like across their brains, and like their arms are guns and long blades, and they've got big metal talons and long tails that got spikes embedded on them, and if they sting you with the spike, it's poison. They're like ancient cyborg lizard people, and I was like, wow, we are genre mushing right now, aren't we? And it's like, these guys wouldn't be alive if not for their cyborg implants, but they don't seem to be especially smart because they attack us on sight without a word. So they might have been like sentries or guards or whatever, but like the organic part of them is like ancient and shriveled up, and like they've clearly descended into madness. And these cyborg implants just keep them going. So they attack, and, you know, our sniper guy dodges around the corner, you know, aims for the ceiling, squeezes the trigger, you know, he rolls the dice, you know, plus 200, you know, the bullet bounces off like 9 different things and pegs the first one right in the face. And, you know, Mundle has to completely retreat because he's not a combat character. You know, Ice Lady's taking off her gloves, like, I'm gonna grab his gun and freeze his gun over, and you can watch the frost crawl up its arm, and she tears the arm off. And, you know, they're getting their asses kicked because it's 6-on-3. I think Mundle had like a slingshot or something small. But they see that they're losing, and they reach into their knapsacks and they grab like these syringes, and they jab themselves with these syringes, and their muscles bulge way the hell out, and they start hulking up, and they double in size, and they grab Ice Lady around the neck and like throw her to one side, losing the hand in the process. And they're grabbing our regular soldier guy, who pulls one of his grenades and like jams it in their mouth and holds the mouth shut, and they blow up, and the soldier takes tons of damage, flies back. You know, Gadget Guy's got a couple of ray guns. So it's a sci-fi fight in this ancient dwarven tomb space pirate base, and just like, you see what kind of bullshit flies in this game when you mash splat books. And eventually we managed to kill all 3 of them, and their cyborg implants like keep trying. So our gadget guy goes over and like pops a few panels open, starts tearing out wires, until like the red light that represents their eyes starts to go dark, and they stop moving finally because the body has long since given up, but all the machine parts just kept going and going for 2,500 years or whatever it was. So finally there is a silence, and we roam around for a while, and it's a little bit dungeon-like, but it is a space pirate base. So there's like a dart trap that goes off to fill you with numbing agent if you don't know the password, if your handprint doesn't fit the little thing you put your hand on, and scanner, excuse me, it doesn't fit the scanner. And there's a pit trap if you don't like have the voice recognition software doesn't like you, and things like that. And we get past all of this, a relatively small dungeon, to find the power source that is powering the entire ancient space pirate base. And it's basically just like this glass cube that's filled with stardust or something like that. And it's like an infinite energy equation. It feeds itself, and it gives off different types of energy based on how it's calibrated. It's basically like carrying a star around. It's just glass instead of, you know, magma and nitrogen and all the rest. But we put it in our bags, and we're like, okay, the dwarves are going to love this. And we pick it up off the machine that it was on, and everything goes dark, because of course it does. Who's got a lantern? Mundle does. So he actually has to open his spirit lantern and light the candle so that it's used as a regular lantern instead of like a ceremonial lantern, to get everybody out again, because nobody brought a freaking flashlight in this hyper-futuristic technology world. And we make it all the way back to the elevator, and we take the elevator all the way up, and we find that the dwarves are congregating because they're arguing over what to do about the elevator and who they should send down and when. So we step out. We're like, hey, look at what we found. And we give them this artifact, and they, of course, shower us with money and affection and stuff like that. So we leave with our our money bag's quite a bit heavier than before, and we've got plenty of money to find upgrades and, you know, outfit our airship and all kinds of stuff like that, because that I'll just call it a star cube, I guess. This was kind of before the Marvel movies with the cube that Loki carries around. That's one of the Infinity Stones. This was just like a random Magitech power source. It just happened to be a cube. But they gave us a lot of money for our discovery, and we pointed them down there and told them that, you know, there's a space pirate base down there. It's a couple of 1,000 years old, so that makes this tomb even older, and blah-de-blah. And we leave rich people, and we get on our airship and head off to, I guess, to market, to outfit ourselves and buy new toys and things like that for our further adventures. And that was where, like, Mundle kind of stepped out, because, you know, his job is to help shepherd the dead and to kind of guide people in places where the dead are kept, like graveyards or pyramids or what have you. So his role in that party kind of came and went to make sure that, like, the dead were not desecrated or anything like that. And even with the 3 cyborg lizard people, once they had died and their souls were finally released, they were all too happy to follow Mundle's lantern gestures to make it across the river Styx and make it to the underworld, or whatever their religion entailed. So Mundle left the group to return to his tribe, or his city of bear people, or whatever you want to call it. And his episode in that campaign was kind of over. Now, of course, that campaign, you know, kept going and going and going with all different people of all different classes and races. Robert was running it basically like at a constant rate. That's why it was an 8-year-old campaign, because so many people came and went. You know, college students doing the Gamers Guild thing. He would have them in for a couple of games and they would get bored and leave, or they would graduate and move on. So every semester there was a new stock of people to bring into this adventure, and that was just Mundle's episode. So it was kind of interesting. HARP is, you know, I appreciate RPG tabletop systems, you know, they're rules that have some crunch, like 3.5 or Pathfinder, where there's enough crunchy numbers to where I feel like I've got choices and stuff. But HARP is the far end of that scale, where it's just ridiculous. Even character creation is ridiculous in HARP, and I really just wouldn't recommend it to anybody. It's too complicated. It's too thorough. You know, it's like the opposite of D&D 5th edition. Yeah, if you had a spectrum, it would be HARP on one side and D&D 5th edition on the other side. They're just complete opposites of each other. So it was a fun game. It was just a bad system to play it with. It was interesting to see somebody else's setting that had been growing and changing and morphing and laying out its own history for so long. Like I said, I was in like chapter 18 of a 50-chapter book or whatever it was. So I was not an important person, but I did have a role to play while I was there, and I had a lot of fun doing it. So that was the story of Mundle the Shaman. I hope you guys enjoyed that, and I will see you guys on the next D&D Stories. Keep gaming. Hey guys, thanks for watching. I really love telling D&D stories, and I also really love eating food. So if you'd like to toss a couple of gold pieces into this humble bard's hat, be sure to check out my Patreon. If you enjoyed this story, be sure to hit the like button as well. And if you'd like access to maps, character art, and channel updates too, check out the D&D Stories Facebook. Keep gaming!